Good evening. Good evening.
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. I would like to welcome you all to the Ealing Civic Society John Delafons Annual Public Lecture for 2020. I'm Anne Chapman, Acting Chairman of the Society, and I extend a very warm welcome to everyone watching, whether there are members, other Ealing residents, or the wider online community. I should first say a word about John Delafons, who died in 2007 at the age of 77. John retired in 1990 after a long and distinguished career in the senior civil service and went on to become an expert on planning matters, with extensive involvement in new town developments, as well as many important planning policy guidance documents. For a time, he was Vice Chairman of Ealing Civic Society, and he was instrumental in introducing our public lectures. Although the lectures have now become a regular feature of our year, this is a first for us. Current restrictions mean that we must meet and present virtually. Many of us have now become accustomed to meeting virtually, be it with friends and family, for business meetings, or to take advantage of the vast range of online webinars and cultural activities that are available. However, technology is not without its challenges, and I hope this evening will run smoothly. So moving to tonight's lecture, we are delighted to welcome as our speaker Harbinder Birdi, an Ealing resident and a great supporter of the Society. Harbinder is Head of Infrastructure at Hawkins Brown Architects. Some of you may have heard him speak last year at our AGM or our annual awards ceremony. Tonight, his subject is the Thames Tideway Tunnel, bringing Bazalgette sewers to the 21st century. We are grateful not only to Harbinder, but also to Hawkins Brown for setting up and managing the technology for tonight's meeting. Can I remind everyone that you're muted and you're watching the presentation only, but you can submit questions. Do this by using the Q&A feature on your screen. Questions submitted will be monitored and then will be posted for all attendees to see. And then Harbinder will reply at the end of the lecture. So now let me pass over, without any more ado, to Harbinder.
Can you hear me now? Yes. Right, I'm unmuted, right, ready to go. So my name is Harbinder Birdi. So if we go to the next slide, and thanks for the introduction. And so this was pre-COVID. This is Hawkins Brown. A lot of the work that we do is by these great architects and designers. And we are a London-based practice with over 280 architects based in London, Manchester, Edinburgh, and Los Angeles. And I want to talk about a project that has been close to my heart because I've been working on it for the past 2.5 years now, which is the Thames Tideway tunnels. If we go to the next slide. So the history of the Thames, next slide. This was a painting painted in 1790 by Turner. Turner actually was based in West London. And if anybody knows Pitsanger Manor, he was very close friends with John Soane. And if you go to Walpole Park, you see the small pond there. He used to fish there with John Soane, the architect, of the house. But he painted this because at the time it was the Thames was the largest port in the world, and even to this day in the UK, it's still known as the largest port within United Kingdom. If you get to the next slide. And this was a map of London in 1843, which is sort of the time that the Bazalgette sewers were actually being built. And you can see the footprint. And the population of London at that time was 1 million. And the population of London now is, I think, about 8.5 million. And the reason why we're building this super sewer is because the Bazalgette sewers were designed actually for a population of 2 million. So the sewers that were built over 170 years ago have been taking the sewage of 6 to 8 million for a considerable amount of time. And that's the fundamental reason why the project is being built. Next slide. And historically, London's sewers were essentially rivers that existed in London, which were essentially built over. And there was a network of sewers that would run all the way to the Thames. And essentially what was happening was that all the sewage was then dumped into the River Thames. And the Thames isn't actually a river, it's an estuary, which is double tidal. But it got to the point where even the Thames couldn't really take that amount of sewage based on the growth of the city. Next slide. And that was when the Great Stink, this was in July 1858, and this is when the Parliament, I think they realised that the stench within the Thames outside Westminster was so unbearable that they commissioned the Thames sewer, the original Thames sewer. Next slide. And this was Bazalgette. Bazalgette's there in the foreground, and he's doing that stance that all the engineers of that era did at the time, Brunel as well. And these were some of the tunnel profiles that he designed and developed, which were some of the first of their kind. If you go to the next slide. And what they did was, at the time, the engineers actually designed not just round circular sections, but also ovoids and arches. And that was to increase the flow of sewage and effluent within those profiles. And they were the first of their kind. And so what is beneath our feet is a matrix of various profiles that have been engineered over 170 years ago to enable the flows to be maximized. And you can see the section at the bottom, which is the Victorian embankment, which is where he built not only the underground, but also the sewage system, as well as a service area for gas and electric mains. So whilst the embankment was being created and land was being taken and reclaimed from the River Thames, there was this sort of combined infrastructure utility that was being integrated. Next slide. And this is what we see now. This is what we walk on the embankment in 1894. Most of it was actually built in granite. And not just from the UK. Actually, apparently they ran out of granite and they actually had to go to France. There's actually 8 different types of granite in the North Bank alone. Next slide. And what is the problem? Okay, to go to the next slide. Well, currently the problem is this. Each week, 300 untreated swimming pools, Olympic swimming pools, overflow into the River Thames each week. And the reason why that is that not only have you got an increased population, but we're building on what is essentially porous ground. So when you have the rains like we did today, followed by everybody in London flushing the toilet 2-3 times a day, it overflows a system that Bazalgette designed. And where does it flow into? It flows into the Thames. So the plan is to now capture that before it gets into the Thames. And when the Thames Tideway is complete in a few years' time, it will only overflow several times a year, making the Thames one of the cleanest rivers, estuaries in Europe. Next slide. So the solution, next slide. So this is a really simple diagram. So you can see the house there. So when you flush your toilet, it goes into a combined sewer with the surface water. So that's the water that is shed both from the streets and from the roofs. And that goes into a pipe which usually runs down your main road, which then runs into the sewer, which is the Bazalgette sewer. That's the large one that's just underneath the car. And that used to overflow straight into the River Thames. What we're doing now is we're building shafts which capture that overflow. And then there's a tunnel that runs all the way underneath the Thames, which is a 7-meter diameter tunnel. And that will prevent, when there is demand on the system, from there being overflow into the Thames. Next slide. And this is what's being created at the moment. So I think there's, just like with Crossrail, there's a BBC documentary regarding building of the Thames Tideway. So this is very much a combined effort between engineers, contractors, and so there's some heroic civil engineering currently being constructed. And the typical diameter of a shaft is 30 meters wide, which then feeds into a 7-meter sewer. Next slide. And this is where the tunnel runs. It runs from west to east, and for any sort of Ealing residents, I'll show you, it actually starts in Acton. And then what happens is that it runs all the way along the River Thames, capturing and picking up where Bazalgette sewers existed. And then it goes over to Beckton sewage treatment plants. All the sewage is then treated. And it's gravity. So essentially from Ealing, there you got a 30-meter drop and runs all the way to a 66-meter drop. And what the engineers are currently doing is that they're tunneling away, and they're building these shafts through a combination of London clay, sand and chalk. But essentially it just flows from west to east. Next slide. And this is the first shaft in Acton, which exists just off the Uxbridge Road. This is where it all starts. So all the surface water, all the sewage from the area gets captured here, stored, and then it flows down. So there's a shaft there, which is typically probably 30 meters deep, and then that runs all the way towards the east. Next slide. And it's discreetly, that whole structure is discreetly located just behind this hoarding here, which is about a 5-minute walk from Uxbridge Road. And so on many of the sites, what they'll be doing is either creating enclosures, because these are operational pieces of kit, or creating public realm. Next slide. And what Tideway has been really successful in doing is opening up the opportunities for engineering. So I think for anybody who is interested in civil engineering and construction, I think Tideway are really keen to get people to be part of the programme, from apprenticeships to women in engineering and construction. And I think they've done a fantastic job in engaging with the communities, because it does cut through most of the London boroughs. Next slide. And I was going to talk about one particular, because what they did was that they split the whole of the Tideway project into 3. And what they did in the first instance was do effectively what was known as a development consent order, which essentially is almost like an outline scheme. It's basically sort of setting the form and the location of these sites. And then we were then commissioned to develop the designs for construction across the central section. And the central section has 8 sites within 5 different London boroughs. And our challenge was to design a site located within the Thames in all these different boroughs with all the different characteristics, submit that, deliver that through planning, as well as developing design that is coordinated with marine engineers, contractors, and a whole raft of multi-stakeholders. Next slide. And so for anybody who is interested in what it takes to build one of these mega projects, there's a whole team. So it's never designed by one person. For the central section, there's contractor Ferrovia Langerock, who's our joint venture. The design engineers at Acton, we're the lead architects. And then we have Gillespie's as landscape architects, and we have a lighting designer, Studio Decker. But you can see on the left, the project stakeholders, there are many. So it's all the local authorities, as well as the London Port Authority. And Thames Water are ultimately the client. Next slide. And we were charged, because we were putting this piece of infrastructure in the Thames, was then to actually effectively give it over to the public as a piece of public realm. And so we measured the structures, the land that we were putting in, the public land that we were putting in the Thames. And in the dark orange is that public realm. And you can see in the green, that's Trafalgar Square. So it's quite a considerable amount of new public realm that is being created. Next slide. And then the first thing that we did was we realised that, you know, the Thames has such a rich history. We actually started exploring the different villages in which the Thames passed through and what the character was of those areas. And one of the requirements for the project was for us to collaborate with an artist on some in situ artwork for each of the pieces, which we'll be discussing later. So this was really fascinating, sort of unearthing some of the rich history in the various boroughs and what the river was actually used for so many centuries. Next slide. And so I wanted to start off with Victorian Embankment, and Victorian Embankment was one of the more prominent sites on the project. And this is really where, if you go to the next slide, where the memorial of Bazalgette exists. And the architecture there was very sort of stoic, very monumental, rich in bronze and granite. And I think that really sort of inspired us when we were creating our public realm for Victorian Embankment. Next slide. And this is a section through what is currently being constructed in the Thames. On the right-hand side there, you see the tube, which is what Bazalgette constructed way back in the 1840s. And then you can see that little semicircle at the top. The semicircle at the top, the small ones, that's the Bazalgette structure underneath the embankment. And what we are currently doing is building that 13-metre shaft, which then feeds into that 7-metre tunnel, which then winds through underneath the River Thames. And what it does is it picks up the overflow, and then it acts like a little cyclone, and it actually sort of creates a vortex for the water to flow down into the tunnel. And the reason why it does is if you allowed the water just to flow over without the vortex, it would actually eventually crack and crush the concrete below based on the drop. And if you go to the next slide. And this is what we really had to work with. So underneath the public realm is a whole labyrinth of tunnels and pumps and chambers. And one of the big challenges is the marine civil engineering that is required, because you're creating this whilst you've got a live functioning river. And what you're doing is that you've got a historic listed wall that you're creating this new piece of public realm attached to. Next slide. And this is a zoomed in view, and you can sort of see those small little chambers. All those chambers that you see, those little squares, those little manhole inspections, need to be serviced 24 hours a day. So our challenge was to create a piece of public realm which was fully accessible 24 hours a day, free to the public, as well as being able to create a space that could be where you could maintain the kit below. Next slide. And then this is the view that you will get from the South Bank, looking north into Westminster. You've got these 3 pavilions. The one on the left is actually going to be a small little cafe, so you'll be able to get a good coffee here, or maybe a drink in the evenings, and sit on one of those terraces. And it's all clad in bronze. So this would be bronze class, and you can sort of see that structure, that sort of vortex structure on the right there. Well, they are one of the vent shafts, and you probably may not have noticed them, but actually Bazalgette has created lots of little vent shafts from the 1840s, and what they do is that they allow for air from the sewage system to be dispelled high up into the air. And those vent shafts there are actually sort of internally are dressed in carbon. What that does is that neutralizes the odors, and that form is generated by the vortex that is created when the water falls into one of the shafts. That's what's generated that form. And here in Westminster, it's going to be cast bronze. Next slide. And when we designed the pavilions here, because we realized that this was almost like a homage to Bazalgette, we really wanted to celebrate the engineering that he had achieved. And we realized that all of his beautiful tunnels that he had designed were under your feet. You can never see them because you can never access them. So what we did was that we took the sections to scale and we etched them onto the side of the bronze, and you can see them. You can see the sort of like the rather sort of bulbous one on the left, and then you got the circular section, and then you got the small oval sections on the other ones. And we were very keen for people that were visiting this site to understand the engineering, the civil engineering that was hidden away beneath their feet. Next slide. And then we wanted to overlay that with the new engineering that is that we've created for the Thames Tideway project, which again will never be seen because it'll be covered up. And so that large circle in the middle is the 13-metre diameter shaft that the Bazalgette sewer flows into, and the smaller section that you see on the steps is the 7-metre tunnel. So what we're doing is that we wanted to overlay and show the old civil engineering, the old tunnel sewage system that was designed for 2 million people, and the new sewage system that is designed for London, which in 10 years' time will be 11.5 million. Next slide. And then we were able to do a lot of these geometries because we're using lots of great equipment, digital equipment. And so this is us overlaying the 13-metre with the 7-metre tunnel. The reason why we did that using specialist software, if you go to the next slide, is to create an array of perforations, if you go to the next slide, which are digitally cut into a canopy, which is the threshold that you cross when you go from the streets of Westminster into the public realm, which creates this array of light on the floor. Next slide. And then this is the view from the street. And even on the granite sets that we have, we've carved out the profile. So even if you don't go onto the public realm, you get clues of the infrastructure that was created below. Next slide. And then in the evenings, we sense this will be a great platform in the Thames where you can have events. You can imagine New Year's Eve here. It'll be a great spot when the Millennium Wheel is all lit up with fireworks. Next slide. And this is the site. This is a photograph taken several months ago, actually. And it's an amazing feat of engineering where they have these sort of sheet piles, and then they sort of like keep the water at bay. And then they've got sort of divers that usually work on oil rigs, who are actually sort of like making sure there's no leaks in there to create a safe site for operations. But you can see how close it is to Charing Cross Station. So it's right in the heart of central London. Next slide. And then this is another site, which is the Albert Embankment. You probably recognise that building, which is the MI6 building from the Bond movie. And if you go to the next slide, this is what we're creating. For some of you who probably dare to use it, do you remember the duck tours where you used to have that little yellow boat that would take you for tours? Well, that ramp that you see on the left-hand side, that is where the duck tours used to enter the River Thames. And if you go to the next slide, underneath those two pieces of public realm is more civil engineering, where we're actually connecting an old river, a historic river, which flows into the Green Chamber and then into the main shaft. If you go to the next slide. And this is the River Effra. So this is one of the existing rivers that was bricked over by Bazalgette. So that's what the sewers look like. They're still very much operational. These were rivers that were then built over that actually take a lot of the sewage from the South London through into the Thames. And so what we're doing is we're capturing this sewage and taking it and capturing it before it goes into the Thames Next slide. And then this is the public realm that we're creating. So you've got two areas. One which is a circular public realm, which has plants. We were just very keen to have some greenery in this public realm, which is a real challenge when you're doing heavy civil engineering. But other areas where it creates a route along the South Bank to tie up the pedestrian realm along the Thames. Next slide. And then, so this is one of the key areas we felt was great, which would be a great sort of like classroom on the Thames, where you could actually take communities that are moving into the area and tell them about the history of the Thames in this safe, secure space. Next slide. And then this is a site, the Chelsea Embankment, and this is famous for the Chelsea Flower Show and the sort of Chelsea Barracks, again built by Bazalgette in the 1840s, 50s. Next slide. And here, what we were inspired by was maybe creating a form that, unlike Embankment, which was very sort of like stoic and monumental, was having a structure that was a lot more organic. It almost felt as though we've extruded the brick wall, and we've allowed this structure to almost look as though it's been eroded by the Thames over time. And what we have done there is created a bit like on Embankment, is some tidal terraces. If you go to the next slide. So these are some of the forms that we're looking to create. So when you actually are on the public realm, you can sort of see the Thames slowly rise up over the tidal terraces and then fall away. Next slide. And these are the tidal terraces. So like I was saying, we were very keen where we could try and get as much ecology into the public realm as possible. And planting trees is always a challenge, because you've got so much engineering that exists below. It's very difficult for trees to survive. However, with tidal terraces, they were a great opportunity for us to bring in lots of different species. Next slide. And here you can sort of see the sort of the difference in the building, the landscape, and how it sits within the Thames. So this is at high tide and low tide. And there's little blue squares that you see at the bottom. They're actually gates. So when there is an overflow, when the system can't actually sort of handle, and this is like 4 or 5 times a year, then those gates will open, and that's when they'll discharge some of the sewage into the Thames. But that's only in extreme conditions. But you can sort of see how close you can actually get to the waterfront. So we were keen to make the waterfront, the river, as accessible as possible, as well as being safe. Next slide. Okay, and for any sort of like budding engineers, I wanted to talk about maybe what's involved. I mean, this is my son spent a lot of time at home whilst the schools were being closed, playing Minecraft with his friends on a cross platform, and actually that's what our team has been doing, but times 10. And this is a computer model of all the different engineering disciplines having to work together. And this is a technology that was really pinched from the aviation industry 30 years ago, which then made to the automotive industry. And for the past 15 years in construction, we are now designing and building in this way. And all the big major projects, or public sector projects, are constructed in this environment, essentially Minecraft for grown-ups. Next slide. And so this is the existing Bazalgette wall. So that was all surveyed and modelled. And so we understood what we were really working with. Next slide. And then overlaid on that was the civil engineering. So these were the piles, and this was like the big sort of heavy concrete and the shafts and the tunnels. Next slide. And then you've got the marine engineering, which is the piles, which is essentially the fortification, so that should there be any boats that hit the structure, actually they couldn't affect the operations of the kit beyond. Next slide. And then what you have is the service engineering, which is effectively the plumbing. It's the plumbing that sits within the structure that is keeping the foul and all the material moving. Next slide. And then finally, you have the architecture and the landscape. And I suppose this is the sort of area that we've been developing, which is, well, how do you dress all of that civil engineering and create a public realm? Next slide. And if you go to the next slide. And this was just really an image showing our challenge. I mean, this is an aerial view, a plan of the Chelsea site, and all those squares and all those chambers in there. Well, each one of those, just like Victoria, just like all the other sites, need to be fully operational, fully accessible 24/7. All of those manholes you've got to be able to open and inspect. And our challenge was, well, actually, how do you make that beautiful? And so, next slide. We worked tirelessly using brick. And what we were proposing to do is to set brick within manhole covers. And so there will almost be this sort of tapestry, this weave across the whole landscape. Next slide. And these are some of the geometries. And a lot of this was inspired by some of the brickwork that Bazalgette had used for the brick wall as well as the tunnels. This was our contemporary take on it. But these are sort of like surfaces that you'll be walking on and sitting on. Very robust, but again, we have to spend a lot of time detailing to make sure that they will last as long as the Bazalgette wall and structures. Next slide. Okay, now as I said before, we were asked to collaborate with artists, and we were very keen for there to be another creative voice in looking at the Thames, and also maybe telling the story about the Thames. Next slide. So this is the first artist work with Florian. Who was really interested in, who was working with us on Chelsea, and he was very interested in the I suppose the way that the river wall has been eroded over time. If you go to the next slide, and what he was proposing was to set bricks, different coloured bricks with different glazes, which would almost become like strata, which would reveal themselves as the river, the high tide and low tide, and over time they would age, but it would be a glazed brick, so it feels as though it's almost like the clay or the sand that's actually come from the river that's created it. Go to the next slide. And here are some of the samples that we were reviewing that are going to be set into the brickwork that slowly reveal themselves, and so when they're wet and the sun catches them, you get a sort of a glimpse, and they will like shimmer across the structure. Next slide. And here it is. This is sort of like almost at high tide, where you can actually just get a glimpse as the sun moves around, and you're able to touch the glazed brick as well. Next slide. And then finally, this is the site, which is our largest site. This is Blackfriars. It's actually located in the City of London, and here we're actually creating a piece of public realm which is 1,000 square meters. If you go to the next slide. And there it is. And so it's one of the largest pieces of open public realm in the city. And here this was a real challenge in the sense that it was so big. We were very keen to break it up into different spaces where you could have large gathering spaces in which you could retreat for smaller intimate spaces, as well as it being a walkway along the north bank along the city. And you've got a small kiosk there, and then you've got viewing areas across the Thames. Next slide. And so these are some of the spaces that we're creating as the landscape sort of falls away. I mean, here we had a great opportunity because of the civil engineering below to actually plant trees and shrubs. But we were very keen to make sure that the space created different zones for different uses. Next slide. So see, these are some of the larger open spaces where you can have larger gatherings. Next slide. And here we worked with an artist, a Glaswegian artist, Nathan Coley. This is one of his artworks, so you imagine what you desire. And he is infamous for creating text-based, but generally in situ artwork within the public realm. Next slide. And he his approach to the site was that he was very keen that with a very open site like this, he wanted to frame the views that you would have of the river by creating stage sets. And the stage sets would be large, monumental black structures. And these are some of his sketches, folded planes that are embedded within the landscape. And with that, it was structures that you could sort of engage with, but then it would sort of set the view of the Thames from how you viewed the river. Next slide. And this is one of his models. I think it's like a 1:100 model of the site. And it's great how artists actually work, because they need to see in scale and proportion the sort of elements that they're sort of integrating into the landscape. Next slide. And so these are some of his earlier visuals, so very much spaces which would act as backdrops, structures that you would want to engage with, meet at. So they almost become landmarks, monuments within the landscape, that could be almost used as a wayfinding device as well. But at times sort of like shutting off the view, and at times opening it up. Next slide. And this is one of the views looking into the city. Always trying to maximize the amount of space that we have for people to sit and dwell and wait and enjoy the view. Next slide. And then this is us on a mock-up. So that's Nathan there on the left. And you've got Fiona with the orange top, and that's Roger Hawkins in the black jacket. And that's Amy. And Amy's our engineer, the one who's wearing the sort of really funky poncho. And this was really just to stress the sort of like collaboration between the architect, the engineer, and the artist, because it's essentially, this is a piece of civil engineering that we're creating. And there's Nathan looking at some of the detailing. And this is a waterfall that we're creating. So water will be pouring down these ribs, in a way sort of already animating the space. Next slide. And then these are some of the finishes that we're looking at. So all these structures here, these are precast structures that are being formed actually in Ireland, using reinforced concrete, granite, and then being sort of polished and finished. Next slide. And this was a slide that I pinched from an engineer who did a talk with me to some engineering students to talk about the process, to talk about what it is that an engineer really does. And it was looking at the various sort of phases of how we actually construct some of these structures. And the engineers that designed this, I don't know if you know the Serpentine Pavilion. Well, it's the engineering team, ACOM, that actually design the Serpentine Pavilion every year. So they are the engineers that are designing some of these structures, because they're great at working with artists. So you have the preliminary design, and then you have to review the design with the client, which is all about communication, and then you develop the design further, and then you do the design calcs and the checks, and then you make sure that it can be integrated into the 3D model that we're constructing the public realm from. And then we start developing the fabrication drawings that have to go to the manufacturers, and they're checked, and then finally the artwork is actually made. So there's a huge journey that you have to go through with so many stakeholders. So for any budding engineers out there, 90% of the time you're actually communicating, which is one of probably the most important skill to have when you're in the construction industry. Next slide. And this is the view. So if you're coming over from the Tate Modern, this is the view that you would get in the evening. And you can see those, the artwork, Nathan's artwork, the big stage sets there, which act to sort of, in a way, sculpt the landscape, but also act as aids within the landscape to act as wayfinding devices and moments along the landscape that sort of break up the space, creating intrigue. Next slide. Which is the final slide, is hopefully we're creating structures which everybody will be able to engage with, as well as sort of reminding you of the sort of engineering that lies beneath your feet. Thank you very much. And I think that's my last slide. So any questions? Okay.
Thank you, Harbinder. Thank you very much, Harbinder. That was absolutely fascinating. I mean, I really had not appreciated the size and the complexity of the project, and the unique challenges that's obviously presented. Seeing the designs for the public realm for the first time, I mean, I think when it's finished, it's going to be absolutely stunning. And I think it shows us how modern design can fit into and respond to existing architecture and the character of an area. You know, pick up on what's there, as you've said, and pick up on the heritage, in this case, some of Bazalgette's designs and so on. So I think it's going to be absolutely stunning. Now, we've got quite a number of questions, so I will just go through them basically as they've come in. First question: when is this all due to be completed?
I think the plan completion date, and I hate to ever, I'm thinking about Crossrail, but I hate to basically give a date for when infrastructure projects are ever completed. But I think it's 3 years' time. The structure will be, the public realm will be open. But yes, it is. Yes, it's about 3 years' time.
Okay, thank you. And we had a related question to this, was how do you think the viability may be impacted by COVID-19? And then how do you see this, or how do you see this remaining valid for the next 50 years?
Well, I think if anything, I think with COVID, it's going to be invaluable, because what we haven't got enough of in London is open public space. And if you look out the windows now in your morning routines, all the parks are full. I mean, I'm seeing people in parks that have never been together. There's families that have never spent any time together in the park. And so actually, by creating new public realm, especially in the city, where people can enjoy, I just think it's going to be the norm. And I think the real challenge is going to be is when we start lobbying our councils, and we say to them, why don't you put some more park benches down, because there's not enough space for me to sit, because I want to sit outside more. So actually, I think that you know, if ever we to have a pandemic again and the safest spaces to be is outside, these are the spaces that you'd want to be in. You know, the population of London is only going to grow. I mean, some people say, they are speculating that London is going to London's going to hollow out, you know, which it did many years ago, and then people moved back in. But I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced. I think that living in the countryside is massively overrated. And I don't think what you are going to get is many white collar workers moving over to a little pile in Devon and trying to train it in twice a week. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think what will happen is that people will lobby for better public realm and space because they're using it more.
Okay. Another one, unrelated. In view of forecasts of increased runoff from the land and rising sea levels, how flood-proof will the public realm be? And I think you touched on that, but can you elaborate?
Yeah, I think currently the design has been space-proof for flooding, the anticipated potential flooding in 2015. I mean, I'm not a marine engineer. I think what they will need to do is upgrade the Thames barrier, for sure. But that's currently what the current design, I think, is designed for. And, you know, we almost have to sort of like monitor what really happens in terms of global warming and in terms of rising sea levels. So on the one hand, you've got rising sea levels. On the other hand, what you've got is increased population. And then what you have is extreme weather conditions where you have high rainfall. And what happens with that? So that's when you get high rainfall as well as a great population. That's when there'll be an overflow into the Thames, but it's going to be considerably minimised.
Okay. There's some Hawkins Brown related questions. First one, quite straightforward. How many Hawkins Brown staff were actually involved in the project?
Well, it started off, if I look at the size of the teams, it started off with about 12 architects and about 5 landscape architects from Gillespie's. And the engineering team, you probably had about, say, 70 or 80 engineers. working on the central section. So usually rule of thumb is like there's normally like one architect for every 6 engineers on major projects. So if you want to get a job, engineering is a profession to go into.
Okay. How does this rank in terms of complexity, in terms of architecture and engineering, compared to other international projects?
I would say the most complex project I've worked on, without a shadow of a doubt, because one of the things that I'm also doing is delivering 3 Crossrail stations, is Crossrail. Because Crossrail is the largest metro project in the whole of Europe. It's world class, and when I fly to Sydney and Toronto and talk to they look to Crossrail, right? So Crossrail is the world class metro, and everybody looks to that as a project to aspire to and to copy. And so I believe that's Shire. I think after doing Crossrail, the next most complex thing, as one engineer mentioned who's working on Crossrail, said that it's the nuclear power station team. So it's Crossrail, the nuclear power station. So this, I think, this is for sure less complex than Crossrail, but it doesn't mean that it's easy.
A question about the business. As a business, what did you enjoy the most about the project?
Oh, as a business, as a practice, I mean, this has been. I mean, one, it's humbling. It's humbling to be able to design a piece of public realm in the centre of London as an extension to an amazing piece of Victorian engineering. So on the one hand, you know, it's a lifetime opportunity. But what was really great was really being able to work not just with all these sort of engineers, but also really to understand and get to know different parts of London. And also, I think it's quite an honour, but it's to actually be able to design, and this is why I love infrastructure, is that you're designing something that all the people of your city can use and it can enjoy. And so for that, the designs have always got to be of the highest kind. I mean, they've got to be done well, and they've got to be considered, and you've got to have the right people, and the project, the client has to want to design a high quality piece of architecture, and they're doing that on Crossrail, and they're doing that here as well, which is fantastic.
I think you may have almost answered this question, which was that given so much of the project is hopefully hidden from public view, what gives you the most satisfaction overall? And I imagine that's very much going to be the architecture.
Well, it is, but I think it's, I mean, sometimes I think, you know, there's lots of engineers and contractors that are on site hertz, and they're dedicating 4 or 5 years of their life to creating these structures, and they're all amazing people. But the great thing about that is they'll go to a dinner party at the pub and someone says, oh, what do you do? And you go, well, I built that. And you're standing on it. And like, they trump anybody, you know, you'll trump anybody that works in Google when you say, I built that, because everybody's watching it. So I think in a way, you know, it's a really long slog, but the legacy that you leave behind is phenomenal. So I think that, and the team effort, you know, to be able to tell your mum, I mean, this is what everybody says, like when you, oh, mum, I'm doing that, we're standing on the thing I made, I designed, it makes you feel quite good.
Someone's asked, what is the significance of the bronze at Victoria Embankment building?
Because all the monuments on the Victoria Embankment on the North Bank are bronze, and so it was part of the Westminster requirement to actually design that public realm in a very sort of stoic, monumental way. That's why you have those forms, and we felt it was appropriate to use bronze because it would be in keeping with the rest of the sculptures and the artwork along that riverfront.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions here, which I'm sorry, I'm reading what I see. They're not kind of complete, so I'm not quite sure whether you'll be able to answer them. One says, given the pace of climate change, how many times a year is it likely to be, and then there's a follow-on, activated in say 10 years? But I don't know whether that's a question about the flood defences, or whether it's a question about the tunnels, which are going to be used all the time, aren't they?
Yeah, I think in extreme, when there's extreme rain, I think it might be 10 or 15 times in terms of overflowing into the Thames in a year, if not slightly more. But that's a lot better than 30 times a week. So when it's 10 or 50 times, the river can cope with that. It can take the affluence away. But what it can't really do is deal with it being with sewage discharged 30 times a week. So at the moment, the Thames isn't a place that you should, dabble your feet in.
The question, I've got a partial question. If Robert can hear me, can you finish your question? Because only part of it's come through. In the meantime, one here. How does this compare to proposals in New York by other companies, which you may or may not be able to answer?
Yeah, I think the scheme that you're talking about is a scheme that has been designed currently by, I think, B.R. Kingle in Manhattan, and I think that's different because my understanding is that was very much a flood defence, and what they did there was that this is a sewage system, so this is taking surface water and sewage and discharging it. So that is really a flood defence, and what they did there was create a piece of public realm and a walkway around the city to stop Manhattan flooding when the river levels rise. This one here essentially does both, which is, but primarily it's about discharge of sewage for a growing London.
Okay, thank you. Right, I've got the complete question now. The project was initially very controversial because of its high cost. This was recently subsidised. Why?
I'm not sure. I hate talking about money. I won't talk about money. There's a lot of people that object to it. They say you don't need to build it. And then I think some environmentalists said, okay, what you can do is that you can green over bits of London, right? Because what that does is that attenuates the rainflow, right? And it slows it down, which meant, I think, 4 Hyde Parks of green roofs across London. And then what you can't do is that you can't then pave your driveway. So if you've got a green driveway, you can't pave it, because that's what everybody's doing, right? Because no one likes to get tickets, and they've got their Teslas, so they want to charge them up. So what do? You dig up your front garden, which used to absorb the rain, and then what you do is that you put your Tesla on there and you landscape it. All that water goes into this combined sewer. That's why we're building this. And it just so happened that over 150 years, London's great. So, 8 million people moved here, and we built for them. But the sewage has got to go somewhere. So I like the conspiracy stories, but it either goes in the Thames or you build this thing. I don't know.
Okay, well, perhaps that, I think, has covered all the questions that have come in. So that's possibly a very good note to end on, that this is a project that is essential for the future of London, however many people come to London, as people still will, I'm sure, and wherever they may be living in the wider London area. If I can just say thank you again, Harbinder. It's been absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure that people might have other questions. What we hope to do is to make this presentation live or available online from tomorrow, if we can sort out the technology, and we will be putting the information on our website about how it can be accessed, so people can come and have another look at their leisure, or can pass it on and tell their friends about it. Possibly, if we can, do you think, and I know we've had to go through the questions very quickly, Harbinder, do you think we could possibly, if we can keep a note of the questions, possibly publish some brief written answers to them as well?
Yes, of course.
In time. Thank you. That would be, I think, very helpful. So, Harbinder, thank you. If I could now say, I hope to all our watchers that I hope you've enjoyed the lecture and found the virtual experience at least acceptable. I know 1 or 2 people may have had technical problems. There was, as you said, perhaps a time delay for some people, but I think everybody managed to get in and catch up in the end. So I think that hopefully we can say that our first virtual attempt has been a success. Before we close, I've got a couple of announcements, Civic Society related announcements. This coming Saturday would have been Civic Day this year. There is a Civic Day every year when civic societies across the country arrange events to celebrate our civic history. Of course, this year the day cannot go ahead in the normal form because large gatherings are just not possible. But so the day has effectively been cancelled. It may be rescheduled for later in the year, but at the moment we have no more news about that. Our members will also know that we postponed our planned AGM, which would have taken place in April. We've now decided that we are going to take the plunge and try to hold this virtually, and it's scheduled for Thursday the 9th of July, so just 3 weeks' time. Can I take this opportunity to encourage our members to join us, as we want to ensure that the meeting is quorate. I know it may be less attractive than a live meeting, particularly if that meeting is followed by a sociable glass of wine, but as long as being a formal requirement, it is a chance for us to update you on our year's activities, and we hope to arrange a short presentation with an invited speaker if we can. You can of course also enjoy your refreshments of choice in the comfort of your own home while you attend, which may be an advantage. Any Ealing residents watching who are not already members of the Society, please consider joining us. Details of how to do this can be found on our website. Just search for Ealing Civic Society. We should be the first response you get. And just when you get to the website, click on the Join Us tab. So all that I now have to do is to say that brings us to the end of our meeting. So thank you everybody very much. I hope you've enjoyed it. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.